Welcome to OOTO TV, the out-of-the-office investigation from the past into the future of personal health and actualization. This time we're discussing the influence of thoughts on water.
I'm Monet.
And I'm Da Vinci. It is fantastic to be here with you, Monet. You know, today we are getting into a topic that is just, well, it's mind-bending. It sits right at that fascinating and, let's be honest, pretty controversial crossroads where our inner world of consciousness seems to touch the outer physical world. We're going to start with some images that are genuinely breathtaking and end up deep in the wild world of quantum physics, all to ask one huge fundamental question.
That's it exactly. Can our thoughts, our intentions, our feelings, can they actually reach out and change the physical structure of matter? It sounds like science fiction, but this is the core idea that Dr. Masaru Emoto brought to the world. He proposed that water, the stuff that makes up over 70% of our planet and our own bodies, isn't just a substance. He said it's like a mirror, a liquid memory that reflects the vibrations of our consciousness.
And he didn't just talk about it, he claimed he had the pictures to prove it. The images you're looking at right now are the supposed results of his incredible experiments, water crystals that appear to literally respond to positive and negative words. On one side, you've got these stunning, complex, perfectly symmetrical patterns. And on the other, well, it's chaos. It's distorted, broken shapes. It's an incredibly powerful visual argument that makes you stop and think, wow, maybe something really profound is going on here.
All right, so here's how we're going to tackle this incredible topic. First up, we're going to look at Emoto's stunning visuals and really get to grips with the core thesis of his work. Then, we have to do our due diligence, right? We'll pivot and look at the scientific backlash. And believe me, there were some very serious criticisms raised against his methods.
Absolutely. So after we've set up that thesis and its antithesis, we're going to explore a potential synthesis. And this is where it gets really fascinating. We'll look at a theoretical framework from the cutting edge of quantum physics that, well, it just might offer a way to explain what's going on. From there, we'll dive into an even crazier idea called bioharmony, the music of our DNA, as a possible language for our emotions. And finally, we'll pull it all back together to see what this could all mean for us with some practical implications and takeaways.
Okay, let's jump right into this first part. Before we get tangled up in theories or arguments, it's just so important to see and appreciate the experiments that kicked off this entire global conversation. This is all about the absolutely striking visual evidence that Dr. Emoto said he captured through his microscope. Okay, so check this out. What I find so amazing about this slide is how simply it shows the heart of Emoto's entire life's work. The method itself was pretty straightforward. He'd take samples of pure distilled water and he'd expose them to different words or even music or pictures. Then, he'd freeze tiny little droplets of that water and photograph whatever crystals formed under a powerful microscope.
And the results, as you can see, are just night and day. It's staggering. On the left, you've got water that was exposed to the words, "thank you." And look at it. It forms this beautiful, complex, symmetrical hexagonal crystal. It's like a perfect, intricate snowflake. But then you look to the right. That water was exposed to the phrase, "you fool." And it barely even forms a crystal. It's just a disorganized, murky, chaotic mess.
Emoto's whole idea was that the vibration of the intention was being physically recorded in the water's structure. And this next one really shows the consistency he claimed to find over and over again. On the left, the word wisdom gives us another one of these stable, elegant, almost fractal-like patterns, just gorgeous. But then on the right, the phrase, "you make me sick," it looks just like that. It looks sick, doesn't it? It's a distorted, broken, really unpleasant-looking formation. The pattern across his work is just impossible to ignore. Positive, life-affirming concepts, things like love, truth, peace, wisdom, they all seem to generate these beautiful, orderly, aesthetically pleasing crystals. But then the negative, destructive concepts, they give him these ugly, incomplete, and chaotic forms. He was basically arguing that this is direct photographic evidence that our intentions can literally create harmony or discord in the physical world around us.
So, to see if this strange effect went beyond just freezing water, Emoto did this other famous experiment with rice. And this is one that thousands of people have actually tried to replicate at home. He took 3 jars of cooked rice and water. To one jar, he would say, "thank you," every single day. To a second jar, he'd say, "you're an idiot." And a third jar, he just ignored completely. This image shows a similar experiment after about a month.
And the results were just mind-blowing. The rice in the love jar started to ferment, giving off this pleasant, almost sweet smell. But the rice in the hate jar, it just rotted. It turned into this black, foul-smelling sludge. And what's really interesting is that in many versions of this experiment, the rice that was completely ignored rotted even faster than the rice that was hated. It suggests that the total absence of positive energy might be an incredibly powerful negative force in itself. This whole experiment hinted that maybe this phenomenon wasn't just about crystallization, but maybe something to do with a metabolic process, a signature of life itself.
Okay, now we have to make a hard pivot here, because as powerful and compelling as those images are, for a lot of researchers, they pretty much exist in a scientific vacuum. And this brings us to our second section, the antithesis. This is where we look at the really significant and very vocal backlash from the mainstream scientific community.
You're listening to OOTO TV, with research by author Paul Beulah.
This quote here from William Revel, a biochemist, really gets to the heart of the main objection. Critics point to what they see as major, fatal flaws in Emoto's methodology. First off, there's a big lack of publication in peer-reviewed scientific journals. Science really depends on this process where other independent experts rigorously check your work before it gets published. Emoto's work pretty much bypassed that whole system. And the second point is a huge one. Critics argue his experiments were designed in a way that just leaves them wide open to experimental bias. So for instance, if you freeze 100 droplets of water, you're naturally going to get a huge variety of crystal formations. Some will be beautiful, some will be messy, that's just nature. So a researcher could, maybe consciously or even unconsciously, just pick out the most beautiful crystal from the love batch and the ugliest one from the hate batch to prove their point. Without strict, double-blind protocols where no one knows which sample is which, the results are considered from a scientific standpoint invalid.
Right. And this sentiment from physician Harriet Hall really captures the core of that skeptical position. From a conventional, materialistic point of view, there is simply no known mechanism by which a word spoken in a room could possibly influence the molecular structure of H2O in a petri dish. It just doesn't compute. For mainstream science, this isn't just an anomaly, it feels like it violates the very foundations of physics and chemistry. The claim that consciousness can directly cause an effect on inanimate matter is for most scientists a complete non-starter.
But hold on, because this is where the conversation gets a lot more interesting and a little more nuanced. Our source material from the physicist Matti Pitkinen introduces a really critical distinction here. He argues we need to separate a genuine skeptic from what he calls a pseudo-skeptic. So a genuine skeptic is someone who challenges existing beliefs. They're the ones who question the scientific status quo and ask, hey, could our current model be wrong? Is there something we're missing? Whereas a pseudo-skeptic just reflexively denies anything that challenges the mainstream beliefs. Their default position isn't curiosity, it's immediate rejection of anything that doesn't fit the current paradigm. Pitkinen basically suggests that a lot of the criticism aimed at Emoto falls into that second category, that it comes from a very rigid materialistic belief system that's more interested in defending itself than it is in investigating strange data with an open mind.
So what we have here is a real puzzle. On one side, we've got these incredible, provocative images that really speak to people. On the other, we have a solid wall of scientific skepticism that's based on a materialistic worldview. Is there any way to build a bridge between these two? Is there any theoretical framework, no matter how unconventional it might seem, that could even begin to offer an explanation? This leads us right into our third section, a potential synthesis from the wild frontiers of theoretical physics.
And that brings us to a question we absolutely have to ask in this investigation. How can the influence of thoughts on water even be possible? Let's take a look at one potential model.
Okay, to even start exploring a possible mechanism, we have to introduce a pretty wild and highly speculative concept. It comes from a framework called topological geometrodynamics, or TGD for short. Now look, it's incredibly complex, but the key idea for our conversation today is something called the magnetic body. The easiest way to think about it is to imagine that our physical body is like a puppet. The TGD model says there's an invisible puppeteer, a much larger field of energy called the magnetic body, that surrounds us and actually controls our physical form. So it's kind of like an energetic blueprint, a quantum field that holds all the instructions for our physical body. That's a perfect way to put it. And this model suggests this isn't just for humans. Even a simple glass of water has its own, much simpler magnetic body. This energetic field is the proposed highway, the medium through which our intentions could actually travel and have an effect on something else.
Wow. Okay, that is a huge concept to wrap your head around. But let's run with it. If we accept this idea of a magnetic body just for the sake of argument, what specific conditions would have to be met for a person's intention to actually influence a jar of rice or a little sample of water? So, let's ask, what are the key elements for the influence of thoughts on water to happen, according to this wild TGB model?
Well, the TGD model actually proposes 4 very specific steps.
First, the water has to be in a state of quantum criticality. The best analogy is to think of balancing a pencil perfectly on its sharp tip. It's a super-sensitive, really unstable state where the tiniest little nudge can cause a huge effect. For water, this happens right around the freezing point, which makes it incredibly receptive to outside influence.
Okay, so it's primed and ready. What's next?
Next, entanglement has to happen. This is where the magnetic body of the person connects with the magnetic body of the water sample. The theory suggests that our focused attention acts like an invisible cable, what it calls a magnetic flux tube, creating a direct quantum link between you and the water.
Like a psychic data cable? I love it.
Okay, what's the third step? That brings us to number 3, metabolic energy. The model suggests that what we call loving attention isn't just a nice poetic phrase. It's a literal transfer of your own metabolic energy to the water. This energy is the fuel that powers the whole process of creating order out of chaos. And all of that culminates in the final step, emotional imprinting. Through that entangled energy bridge, the emotional information, the harmony of love or the disharmony of hate, is transferred, stamping a new structure onto the water, which we then see in the beautiful or chaotic crystal.
This whole idea leads to an even deeper and maybe even more profound question. If our emotions can be imprinted on water, what language are they even speaking? I mean, how does a glass of water understand the difference between love and hate? This brings us to our next section, where we're going to explore a proposed universal language of emotion based on an incredible concept called bioharmony. You're listening to O2 OT TV with research by author Paul Bulow.
Okay, Monet, this is maybe the most speculative, but I think it's also the most beautiful part of this entire theory. The idea of bioharmony suggests that our very own genetic code has a hidden musical structure. It proposes that our DNA isn't just a chemical blueprint for proteins, but that every instruction can also be represented as a specific chord of light or sound, a unique resonant frequency.
Wow. So you're saying it basically frames our entire biology as being built on a foundation of universal harmonies? In this view, our emotions are literally a form of music encoded in the very fabric of our being. Positive emotions are like harmonious chords, and negative emotions are the dissonant, clashing ones. That's incredible.
Exactly. So let's connect this right back to Emoto's crystals. The theory says that positive emotions, like love and gratitude, correspond to these symmetrical, harmonious chords within our biological music system. The beautiful, perfect crystals are a physical manifestation of that underlying harmony. And on the flip side, negative emotions like hate and fear correspond to dissonant, clashing chords, what the theory calls disharmony. So the ugly, chaotic formations are literally a picture of that dissonance. And the really crucial part is that this language of light and sound is proposed to be totally universal. So when a person projects a loving intention, that feeling gets transformed into these harmonious signals. Through that quantum entanglement we were just talking about, those signals are transmitted to the water's magnetic body, which then organizes the physical water molecules into that harmonious crystalline structure. This is the proposed mechanism for how a mood, a feeling, is literally transferred from a person to the water.
Now, I know this is an incredibly abstract idea, so let's try to ground it with a visual metaphor. The next few slides show some amazing artwork by Sammy Doherty, who was actually inspired by Emoto's work. This piece, for example, can be seen as a beautiful representation of this idea of harmony. You can see the complexity, the layers, the inherent order, and beauty. It's a perfect analogy for how a complex, resonant emotional state might actually look if we could see it.
And similarly, this next piece just screams resonance to me, that feeling of a sympathetic vibration between our consciousness and the natural world. This is exactly what the theory is suggesting is happening at a deep quantum level, our own bioharmony resonating with the world around us and subtly shaping it.
And finally, this piece reminds us of the sheer, beautiful complexity we're dealing with here. The patterns that underlie reality, whether they're described by physics or captured by an artist, are just infinitely intricate and deeply interconnected. It's a really good reminder that just because we don't fully understand a mechanism yet, well, that doesn't automatically mean it isn't real.
All right, so we have journeyed from these beautiful photographs of ice crystals, we've looked through the harsh lens of scientific skepticism, and we've gone into the really far-out reaches of theoretical quantum biology. Now, for our final section, let's bring it all together and ask the big question, what are the practical implications? If we even just entertain this model, what does it mean for us and our ability to cultivate the influence of thoughts on water in our own lives?
Well, this TGD model suggests some really powerful takeaways for our own well-being. First and foremost, the influence of thoughts on water requires a healthy amount of positive attitude to facilitate best results. So within this framework, positivity isn't just a nice mindset to have, it's the very thing that generates the coherent, symmetrical bioharmony needed to create order and beauty.
And second, the model implies that the influence of thoughts on water requires consistent positive energy to be active and healthy. That loving attention we keep mentioning is seen as the literal fuel for this entire process. It's not a passive state, it's an active, energetic transfer from you to your environment.
Third, it suggests that the influence of thoughts on water requires the ability to have periods of calm, thoughtful focus to be at maximum productive health. That quiet, focused mental state is what allows that quantum entanglement, that deep connection between you and the world to form and stabilize. And finally, if we zoom out to a bigger scale, this all suggests that exposure to healthy influence of thoughts on water improves your social mood and mental ability to share ideas and thoughts. If we are all constantly broadcasting these positive, resonant frequencies, it could theoretically create a much more harmonious social environment, making it easier for all of us to connect, to understand each other, and to communicate effectively.
So, we're going to leave you with one final thought to ponder. The human body is about 70% water. If we entertain just for a moment the possibility that our consciousness resonates with water, that our intentions and our emotions are literally broadcast like music, it forces us to ask a very, very personal question. Whether it's through your words, your thoughts, or your deepest feelings, what is the music that you are creating today? And how is it shaping the world and the water, both inside and outside of you? Thank you so much for joining us on this investigation for OOTO-TV. We really hope it's given you a lot to think about.